Don't forget, you can reach the latest episode of Potomac Watch anytime. Just ask your smart speaker, play the Opinion Potomac Watch podcast.
From the opinion pages of the Wall Street Journal, this is Potomac Watch.
Welcome back. Before the break, Colin mentioned the framework of oppressor and oppressed and the sort of academic ideas that the protesters are bringing with this. And maybe that helps explain what often to me, Kate, looks like the delusions of grandeur about what they are accomplishing. And I would point to kind of a hilarious exchange with a spokesperson for the protesters who had taken over Hamilton Hall, talking to some reporters, asking for a commitment by the university to let food be brought in or to bring in food. And here is part of what she said. We're saying that they're obligated to provide food to students who pay for a meal plan here to allow it to be brought in. It's ultimately a question of what kind of community and obligation Columbia feels it has to its students. Do you want students to die of dehydration and starvation or get severely ill even if they disagree with you? She went on to call it basic humanitarian aid. And there was almost incredulity, Kate, on the part of the reporters saying, what are you talking about? You took over a campus building and you've barricaded yourselves inside.
Right. I mean, this immediately spawned thousands of jokes on the internet that, the revolution must be catered and that they're basically asking for food delivery after taking this building forcibly hostage. So I do think some of these students and that woman representing the protest to our earlier conversation appeared to be a graduate student, not an undergraduate student. And so some of these graduate or PhD students are no doubt assisting teaching some of the undergrads, some of this ideology that they then carry out in protests. So I agree with your initial point that I'm just curious to find out who of these protesters really were and what their motivations are. I just add too quickly that I think you have to commend the NYPD for the professional job they did in handling the situation when the school finally recognized the reality and called them in. I mean, this is a real tinderbox that cops had to walk into, and you have some of these professional agitators may think escalating with the police is in their interest in getting the demands that they want. So going into that tinderbox is not easy for the police to do, and I think that they did a good job. The question that I have now that Colin was getting at is what happens next. And I think anything less than most of these students being expelled will not get the message across about how students are to behave and persuade others of their opinion on campus. I think it will be instructive whether Columbia merely suspends these students briefly and then allows them to come back and finish their studies, or if they send a clear message about acceptable standards of behavior and expression. It's not obvious to me yet, given how long it took the president and the trustees to come to action here. And only once the protesters so severely escalated and occupied a building, it's not obvious to me exactly what those disciplinary outcomes are going to be.
Colin, we'll give you the last word, but one thing that will be interesting as these protests proliferate nationwide is the range of responses. And it will be fascinating to look back and figure out which universities responded in ways that worked and which were pushed around by the protesters. We've talked a good bit today about Columbia. We talked a little bit yesterday about the University of Florida arresting protesters and saying that the University of Florida is not a daycare. And the Journal's editorial today also mentions Northwestern University. What's going on there?
Well, what's going on is Northwestern just capitulated to the protesters. And I think they probably are holding out the absolute worst scenario of what can happen here. They had a huge number of protesters camped out on their lawn, and their school policy says you can't camp on the lawn. So instead of just getting the campers off the lawn, they said, hey, if you get tents off the lawn, you could still stay on the lawn without the tents. And in exchange, we will hire some Palestinian visiting professors, and we will offer some scholarships to Palestinian students, and we will create a safe space for Muslim students on campus, and we will look at our investment policies. And they sort of went through this whole laundry list of things that they would do for the protesters in exchange for the protesters simply obeying the rules that they agreed to begin with. I mean, it was just a complete capitulation to a student blackmail, and exactly what Students for Justice in Palestine has been hoping for. And I really hope it is not the standard for other universities going forward.
Thank you, Colin and Kate. Thank you all for listening. You can email us at pwpodcast@wsj.com. If you like the show, please hit that subscribe button, and we'll be back tomorrow with another edition of Potomac Watch.